So we're speaking with Sight of Consciousness, and we're speaking with like-minded institutions today about the goals and the thoughts and the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. So there's some rules. So we want to make sure that we keep all responses to 3 minutes or under to allow the museum leaders to get all of the information out. We also want to be respectful of each other and let everybody talk. And when addressing a question, give your name and where you're from. That way everybody will know a little bit about you and a little bit about your background, where your questions come from. Okay? So our goals today are we're going to have a conversation with a like-minded institution, and then we're going to promote educational programs and resources. So we're going to find out what they're doing. And then we're going to communicate about timely issues and create dialogue about those issues. And then we're going to explore ideas about how Dr. King may have felt or reacted about some contemporary issues. Okay? So, people are still coming in, so we're
Sure,
letting them come in.
no problem.
Just do whatever you want. If you have a question, Peter Peter is going to come and give you a pen and an index card, and you can write it down, and we'll ask the question for you to make sure that anything you're interested in gets addressed. Okay? All right. All right. So we'll go ahead and start with you. Tell us where you're from, and tell us who you are.
Sure. My name is Sarah Edkins, and I am the Online Communications Associate at the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. The coalition is a group of museums and historic sites around the world that use the past to talk about contemporary human rights issues and social justice issues. So we work specifically with the National Civil Rights Museum, but also with the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, the Levine Museum of the New South, and several other institutions around the world that use Dr. King's legacy as well as other historical legacies to consider contemporary issues.
Okay, so are you a museum? Do people come to visit you, or do you specifically collaborate with museums?
So we collaborate with museums. We don't actually accept visitors at our site, but we help museums around the world develop programs, and then we sort of work with them at their particular historic sites and museums.
All right, so and I'm sure this will be a source of questions. I know you just mentioned it, but let's mention it one more time. The museums that you work with and that you help to develop programs. We're going to be talking about those programs in a minute. So you work with which museums?
So we work with about 150 museums worldwide, so I won't list them all for you.
Right, just some that are centered around the work of the Civil Rights Museum.
Absolutely. So we actually have a civil rights and immigration network in the American South, which includes the National Civil Rights Museum, the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, the Levine Museum of the New South, the Pauli Murray Project at Duke University, among others.
Okay, and can you tell us about some of the educational programs that you've helped those museums develop, or some of the educational programs that you think are relevant to the Civil Rights Museum that are being run at those museums?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've had several really interesting exhibits that we've helped to work on in the past couple of years. Probably the most important thing we're doing now is the work that we're doing with our Immigration and Civil Rights Network. And what those museums across the American South are doing is taking the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and applying those lessons to the contemporary immigration debate. So, for instance, we have a program right now at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute where they're actually bringing together community leaders from both Hispanic groups and from African American groups to discuss things like educational equality, as well as other equality factors throughout their region to sort of relate those two issues to one another and sort of learn from the lessons of the past to help with some of the same injustices that are happening today, especially with the Hispanic communities in the South.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the program that you just talked about? Or do you have one question about that program? Is the he has a question about the museum in Birmingham, and
Sure.
you're talking Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. All right. Have you visited the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute?
I have not. I've met with the directors on several occasions, but I haven't been to their site, no.
Okay. Well, then let me ask this question, because she's not been to the site. Can you compare some of the programs at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute with some of the programs that you've helped develop with the National Civil Rights Museum? Any links between the programs?
I mean, direct links, no, but they're all working on really the same. the same concept of taking these lessons from the past, taking these civil rights lessons learned, actually looking at the events that happened and how they were successful and not successful, and using those actions as a basis for future actions towards contemporary civil rights. Which applies, still to the African American community in many ways, but also to the increasing number of immigrant communities that we have across the country. So everyone's working on that same theme, but each site does it a little bit differently in order to suit their audience, to suit their community here in the South.
Okay, and let me be a little bit helpful then. It is like similar to the Civil Rights Museum. Civil Rights Museum in Memphis handles civil rights issues on a broad scale. The Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham handles civil rights issues in the 50s and 60s. So they have a more narrow view. The Civil Rights Museum here has a broader view. It is separate. It is separate. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. So now what we're going to do is we want to talk about the since you're not from a museum, we want to talk about how Dr. King may have reacted or felt about some of the issues being addressed by the museums that you work with.
Yeah,
So
sure.
today is Inauguration Day, and it's also King Day, so that's a special thing. And so a lot of people are wondering or thinking, what would Dr. King have to say about a lot of issues going on today? Right, and so one of the major questions is, in this administration, in Barack Obama's next administration, what are some of the things that you think that Dr. King would be keen on Barack Obama addressing? And so we'll let our guests answer that question, then we'll come to the audience. So with the programs that you're working with, the museums you're working with,
Mhm.
issues they're addressing, what's going on in the news today. How do you think Dr. King would feel about those issues, and what do you think he would ask Barack Obama to focus on in this current administration that he's about to start up?
Sure, absolutely. So I think that one of the hot button issues right now is gay rights in the United States, and I know there's been a lot of controversy about how Dr. King might have approached this issue. A lot of people look to his religious values and think he may not have supported, this movement towards gay rights. But I've been, reading a lot about this and talking to a lot of our museum representatives, and overall, I think they very much feel that Dr. King would very much support the gay rights movement, just because he was so open and welcoming to all people and really felt that equality was very important across the board. So, I think that our museums feel the same way, that Dr. King very much would have supported this movement. We actually have one of our sites in the South currently has an exhibit about gay parents. And it's a series of photographs of different gay families where both parents are of the same sex, and sort of examining the injustices they've faced, but also the successes that they've had, and the loving homes that they've created. So that's, I think, one of the big issues that I can definitely see. Another, of course, is contemporary immigration. The United States has an unfortunate legacy of serving some injustices to minority populations in the country. And I think that that is a lesson that can be taken from the 1950s and 60s in the civil rights movement all the way up through today. That we do need to be much more considering the effects of these injustices on our immigrant communities and on our minority communities. And right now, I think that exists especially for both Hispanic communities in the United States and also for Islamic communities in the United States, both of which are really facing a lot of injustice right now, and could learn a lot from the civil rights movement. And I think Dr. King, knowing his sort of history working not only in the American South but also throughout the world, really would support these contemporary issues.
Okay. In the audience, any other issues that you all think that Dr. King would think would be relevant issues for Barack Obama for next administration?
It's a black on black crime shooting one another, fighting to get each other settled, and I say sticking together, as coming together as one. I think they have a whole lot to say about all that violence against one another. That's the reason why.
Can you hear that?
A little bit.
Right.
I think that you're talking about unity and sort of coming together as one. Is that right?
And the elimination of violence,
Yeah, I
addressing
think.
issues of violence in the community, especially with our mass black on black crime, but also with our mass shootings. Our shootings in the movie theater, our shootings in schools. just violence in general and violence, it's violence, black on black violence. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think you've touched on a really key point there, especially when talking about coming together and creating some sort of unity around all of these issues that are affecting our society. I think, one of the greatest legacies of Dr. King was sort of bringing people together and accepting all people and, sort of looking to people to unite around a common cause and around the common good. So I think that all of those issues are really important, and I think that Dr. King's sort of methodology for approaching those kinds of issues is really key and something that we could learn from today.
Now, one thing that we're doing at the museum that we've been spending a lot of time on is this issue of equity education and ensuring that all children receive an equal education regardless of income. We've spent a lot of time in the last year at the museum after they were awarded a $500,000 grant by the Gates Institute, by the Gates Foundation to do that work. How do you think Dr. King would have felt about the issue of equity education, changes that are going on in schools across the country, and the impact that these changes are having? How do you think he would have felt about that?
I mean, I think that there's no question. I mean, we all know sort of the stories of integration in the United States and the United States schools, and I feel like the next reasonable step for that is making sure that all students, no matter what their race or economic background, absolutely should be receiving an equal education. I think that's just the clear next step from the integration of schools movement from the 1950s and 60s, of which Dr. King was a huge part. And therefore, I think that's the best way to answer it. I think it's just the next reasonable step, and I think Dr. King would be, shocked that it hadn't yet happened today. I think this has moved very slowly, in the last couple of decades, since the civil rights movement, and it's really an issue we need to be pushing much harder today. We've laid the groundwork. Dr. King laid the groundwork. Now it's time to actually see real results.
Okay. And then we have another question from the audience. It
Sure.
says, if you were to compare now with the past, would you say that Dr. King's goal has been accomplished? Now, I think we can address that specifically with the things that we've been talking about: issues of immigration, issues of equality amongst people, regardless of who you love, and issues of education. As you compare the time in which Dr. King lived to today, would you say that he would consider his goal to have been accomplished or at least addressed more?
Sure. I certainly think that, we've been making progress and there's been much progress made. That said, I think that Dr. King's real goal was to see true equality, among all the races across the world in all spheres. And of course, we haven't yet reached that. And it's something that we really should be putting a lot more effort into achieving, into really, getting to the heart of what Dr. King was working for, which was equality across the board. And I think that you can all agree with me that we're certainly not there yet. I'm talking to you today from New York City, and we have an incredibly diverse population here, and we have major issues with things like education equality, with things like income equality, with things like access to resources and access to education. And so I think there's a lot of work still to be done. We've certainly made progress, but there's no reason to stop now. We've got to keep moving forward.
We have another question from the crowd. They want to see again who is the lady on where she's coming from.
Okay, and we had some new members walk in, and so they want you to introduce yourself one more time.
Sure, happily. My name is Sarah Edkins, and I'm talking to you today from the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience. We're a global network of historic sites and museums that use the past to talk about contemporary social and human rights justice issues.
Okay.
And she had a question. She wanted to know about the education of both museums. I was telling her that we would have a conversation with other museums, and she wanted to know about the education that happens in the museum. How does that go out to the community? How do schools know about the struggle of Dr. King or what happens in the museums like
At the National Civil Rights Museum. Okay, she wants to. We have an audience member who wants to know how museums are getting the education that they need to advance their communities. So,
specifically the schools?
Sorry, I
and
lost you for a
specifically
second
the
there.
schools. Oh, we have an audience member who wants to know how museums are working to get their educational message out to schools. So I'll address her question for the Civil Rights Museum, and then I'll let you talk about the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute or what another institute you'd like to
Sure,
talk about?
sure.
The museum has a department focused on that. They have an education manager and they have a school program manager. So they have to help promote the mission of the museum. They also have school groups that come in and get tours at schoolwork. We've also just started a resource site for teachers to help them concord the museum to address concord issues or goals. So that is available now on the museum's new website. And so now, with some of the museums with you work, how are they getting their educational message out to the community, schools especially?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the biggest things that the coalition helps our museums around the world do is to actually develop partnerships with local schools. So, they're actually creating relationships with the teachers that have sort of direct access to these kids, and starting oftentimes with a museum professional going into the school, talking to the children, introducing them to the issue, and then actually bringing those lessons into the museum itself, and actually having the children come and visit the museum, and then using ongoing lesson plannings that sort of center off what the kids have already learned and already been introduced to in these historical sites and museums. So this is one of the major things that we fund and help our sites do. The other thing that we do as a coalition is actually gather the resources that sites have used to create these programs and then share them with other museums around the world, so that it sort of takes a little bit of the preparation work out and allows sites to sort of build off each other's successes and take these resources and sort of develop the same programs around different issues in each of their communities. So it's a very community-based approach where all of our sites are looking at the issues that matter to their communities and actually developing long-lasting partnerships with teachers, so that class after class after class at a local school will actually be brought into these museum programs.
Okay, great. Any more questions? Thank you so much for working with us through our technical difficulties. I
Sure,
think
my
we've been
pleasure.
really helpful, and our audience seems to be satisfied with the answers that you provided. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Have a good King Day.
Thank you, you too.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.